Welcome everyone to Psyched. Every Wednesday we talk about different issues, and Andrea Chu, welcome. Is always joining us on
Hello,
our
everyone.
discussions. And Andrea, today we're talking a little bit about stereotyping, racism, prejudice, topics that we think usually are not something that would be in the workplace, right? But it is, right? So when we talk about human resources too, right? Sometimes there's stereotyping. Sometimes with hiring practices that may not necessarily be conscious, but unconsciously we may decide to hire folks of a certain type, of a certain stereotype. So we're going to talk about the halo and the horn effects. Talk us through that a little bit, Andrea.
Okay, all right. So we have very exciting experiments coming up to show you what is the halo and horn effect. But before that, we use these words very interchangeably. Stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination. We use this quite openly. Even in media, you'll see like people using stereotypes and stuff. But let's maybe talk about what is the difference, right? What is stereotypes? What are prejudices? What are discriminations? So, as boss, Roshan mentioned just now, there are a lot of things in HR or even hiring practices specifically. There are a lot of unconscious things that's happening that may be spurned out from stereotypes. So today our episode is going to make it conscious, make us all conscious with our biases before we act upon it. All right, so we have
You,
a quick video. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I think today, it's going to be very engaging. So we want you in the audience to participate. So feel free, when you see something you like or dislike, or you have issues, or you have your own definition of what stereotyping, prejudice, racism, implicit bias, or even unconscious bias. Share your comments, and we'd love to have you and engage you in the discussion. So with that. Prejudice, stereotype, racism. Andrea, you are about to show us a reel, right?
Yes, correct. A video. Let's watch it.
All right.
The murder of 4 Jewish patrons at a Parisian supermarket in January 2015 and 11 worshippers at a Pittsburgh synagogue in October 2018 proves that anti-Semitism, or hostility toward the Jewish people, is current and widespread. But the oppression of minorities is not a modern phenomenon. Prejudice, intolerance of other people or groups, stereotyping, a fixed or oversimplified idea of other individuals or groups, and discrimination, acting on one's prejudice, have been a scourge on society for centuries. In ancient Rome, some leaders were prejudiced against the Jews as an ethnic group and acted on that prejudice by expelling them from Palestine. Throughout history, certain groups of Christians and Muslims have discriminated against Jews for their religious beliefs, considering them incompatible with their own. And stereotypes of the Jews as fiendish and greedy are prevalent in Renaissance art, Elizabethan literature, and on social media. The Nazis exhibited racial prejudice towards the Jews of Europe. Following Germany's humiliating defeat in World War I and the negative impact of recession on the German economy, Hitler made the Jews scapegoats for his country's ills. In his efforts to establish a racially pure Aryan state, he took the lives of 6 million in the Holocaust. But the defeat of fascism did not spell an end to genocide. We saw it again in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and in Myanmar against the Rohingya people. Today, nationalist rhetoric is fanning the flames of prejudice anew, fueled by financial instability and social division in countries around the world. Immigrants are stereotyped as untrustworthy. The rights of women, children, and minorities are at stake. But organizations like the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center are exposing discrimination and educating for understanding. Where there is understanding, there is tolerance. And where there is tolerance, there is unity and strength. Why do you think prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination exist today? What can you do to foster understanding and tolerance?
Okay, right. And that's the video explaining the difference, right? And I really like the question at the end, right? Why do you think they still exist today? Knowing that we have all the knowledge, we know what it is, we know that it's not great. The stats show us that people die and a lot of other things that is really negative. So why do we do it? So if you are watching right now, I think there are a few comments coming in as well. But if you're
Yep.
watching, do comment and let us know,
Yeah,
right?
and Leon sort of kicks us off with a comment that is rather interesting. Love the topic. Not many are bold enough to speak about this that is deemed taboo, and most of the time it's swept under the carpet. And he adds a second thought to say that many companies out there speak about DE and I, and this is diversity and inclusion, right? But I guess it makes them look good and don't really walk the talk. Your quick reaction to that, Andrea?
I really agree. A lot of companies they say, oh no, we are maintaining a certain dynamic to the employees we're hiring and stuff like that. But your interviewers might not realize that they already have a bias. Even before the person walks in for an interview, the resume itself is a bias. So yeah, I really agree, Leon. I think that's a great comment and calling that out as well. So let's get into a very quick understanding or refresh of these descriptions or definitions of what stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination is. So basically, there are three levels to it. Stereotypes on top is actually beliefs, beliefs of a personal attributes of a group of people, and it can be overgeneralized, right? So we hear this a lot. For example, a certain race does this kind of thing, right? That's a belief. A certain race will do these kind of things. Another kind of belief, and then it moves to the second level, which is prejudice. Prejudice is actually an unjustified negative attitude towards its group and its members. So a group of people, you categorize it, then it becomes a prejudice when you have a negative attitude. And lastly, the highest level is an action point, which is discrimination. So this is when you actually behave towards them. For example, you shun them out, you don't give them job opportunities and stuff like that. So those are the three things. So hopefully that brings a lot of light to all of you when you use the right words to explain to somebody you're actually very stereotypical at this point of time, or you are discriminating against me, right? Those are really good words to use when it's true to its definition. Yeah, so we have another experiment to show. Roshan, maybe you can tell us a bit more about the blue eye and brown eyes experiment.
Sure, I think and I think nothing like watching it, right? So maybe it makes sense for us to have a quick look at this and then let's talk. And then this is something that happened some time ago, right? It's not a very recent experiment, the Jane Elliott one. Maybe we just let's watch it and then I think we will be able to see and understand this.
This is a special week. Does anybody know what it is?
National Brotherhood.
National Brotherhood Week. What's brotherhood? Treat everyone as though he was your brother. And is there anyone in this United States that we do not treat as our brothers?
Yes.
Who?
The
The black people. Who else?
Indians.
Absolutely the Indians. Many places in the United States. How are black people treated? How are Indians treated? How are people who are of a different color than we are
But
treated?
they don't get anything in this world.
Why is that?
Because they're different color.
You think you know how that would feel to be judged by the color of your skin? I don't. Do you think you do? No, I don't think you'd know how that felt unless you had been through it, would you? It might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Would you like to try this?
Yeah!
Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Since I'm the teacher and I have blue eyes, I think maybe the blue-eyed people should be on top the first day. I mean, the blue-eyed people are the better people in this room. Oh, yes, they are.
Yeah.
Blue-eyed people are smarter than brown-eyed people. This is a fact. The brown-eyed people do not get to use the drinking fountain. You'll have to use the paper cups. You brown-eyed people are not to play with the blue-eyed people on the playground. Well, the brown-eyed people in this room today are going to wear collars so that we can tell from a distance what color your eyes are.
And it seemed like when we were down on the bottom, everything bad was happening to us.
The way they treated you, you felt like you didn't even want to try to do anything.
It seemed like Mrs. Elliott was taking our best friends away from us.
What happened at recess? Were two of you boys fighting?
Russell called me names and I hit him in the gut.
What did he call you?
Brown eyes. They always call us that.
They keep calling us brown eyes.
What's wrong with being called brown-eyed?
It means that we're stupider.
I watched what had been marvelous, cooperative, wonderful, thoughtful children turn into nasty, vicious, discriminating little third graders in a space of 15 minutes.
All right, and it's just watching this, it's one of those early experiments by Jane Elliott, and Jane Elliott, when she was, I think, in the 80s, right, 50 years later, she revisited this experiment, and when they were talking about her 50 years later in this experiment, I mean, one of the biggest insights that came out of this experiment is that racism, stereotyping, prejudice is actually a learned behavior. And what she found with these little kids was that these are not things that kind of it happens naturally. People actually learn this behavior. And I think one very important point that she made was that if it can be learned, that means it can be unlearned. And this was this was a teacher, right, who basically did this experiment. I don't know if people know this or not, but this experiment was done April 5th, 1968. It was the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And it was something for her to prove that prejudice is essentially a learned behavior. So your quick thoughts. I mean, it's a fantastic experiment. I'm not sure whether some of the viewers out there, whether you've seen this experiment, whether you've learned, whether you've heard of it, and understand some of the implications of what it showed us. Andrea?
Yeah, and I think this, when I was revisiting this, because we learned this in university, and I was just revisiting this for this episode. And I read about the interviews that people had with Jane Elliott over the years. She was on Oprah, when she did this study. She was on Oprah, and she was explaining to the audience in the Oprah show, Winfrey show, that racism actually is really a learned behavior. And if people don't open their eyes and see it, they're just going to keep continuing, and it's going to be passed down to generations. And that's very interesting, right? And she did this experiment with the kids. As much as sometimes people argue it's unethical, I was just joking around with the producers of this show. I said, you know what? Maybe in Malaysia, right, when they enter primary school, all of them will go through this experiment. Maybe they will open their eyes. And you can also watch the interviews they did with the kids after many years, and they remember it.
Yep. And if I recall that Oprah spot, I mean, one thing she made, a comment she made that actually stuck with me quite a bit was, she talked about race, because they say racism comes from race. And then she made this very startling point. She said, do you know there's only one race in this world, right? And Oprah, I can't remember who the interviewer, maybe it's Oprah, maybe not, but I looked at her and said, what do you mean there's one race? There's only one race on the face of this earth, and we are all members of this race. It's called the human race, right? And that was really profound, right? Because ultimately, I think when we start, and we see this profoundly in Malaysia, and Naga's here, Naga Subramaniam from Thailand, welcome to the show, and he makes this very profound comment. Unfortunately, racism has been institutionalized in Malaysia, and if we want to move forward, we will need a very new narrative in our beloved nation. And I think Naga and many others, I was fortunate to be part of your talk last week, where we were talking a little bit about this new narrative, right? And it's not just narratives in schools; it's narratives for nations. One of the points I think Naga and his team made last Saturday when I was on that talk was that if you look at Malaysia, you look at the US, you had that Black Lives Matter movement, triggered by George Floyd. And he says Malaysia, really, the Indians are the blacks, and they need a Black Lives Matter or the Indian Lives Matter sort of a piece. But then again, somebody else made a point. But every life matter. It's not just a black life, right? Every life matters, right? So I think thanks for that insight, Naga. Appreciate it. Zuair. I hope I pronounced Zurain. Sorry, Zurain. Thanks for your comment. Unfortunately, also in Malaysian public sectors, the biases are so deeply ingrained, becomes second nature, and people do not realize it. And this is something we want to talk about for the rest of the show. We want to zoom in on what we call unconscious bias. Happens in the workplace, happens when we recruit people, happens across the board. And she says also in the private sectors, absolutely, right? It's absolutely happening. Zurain, thanks for that comment and that trigger for us to talk a little bit. So Andrea, you had said we wanted to test this hypothesis you have, right? With all of you who are watching, right? And you wanted to do a test activity. Tell us a bit about that piece that I think you wanted to trigger in all of us.
Okay, all right. So we're gonna slightly move our segment a bit more. We're gonna do something first. Sometimes action speaks a bit louder than words. So we're gonna play a really cool game. We're gonna show you certain images. Now, we want you to be very participative and be very vulnerable. Just comment the first thing that comes to your mind when you see these images. All right, there's no judgment here. The only way for us to fight certain things is to make it known. For example, our unconscious biases need to be conscious. But anyways, this is just a very fun game. But let's see what are some of the words that comes out when we show you these images. Okay, let's have a look at the first one. Okay, right. So the first picture is up. Do comment. Let us know what's the first thing that comes to your mind. Roshan, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
It reminds me of a guy who runs Scale Up Malaysia. So, yeah, the smile is there, but the beard is really, really outstanding, I would say. And what for you when you see this, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And everybody out there, give us your comments. I see some comments coming in. Mr. Adams says this is an Indian man. There's some implicit bias there, but never mind, we'll talk about that. And this Sashi says beautiful, probably has a beard himself, right? And Naga says it's Sashi Kanapati from our Leaderonomics Digital, right?
That was the first one I had to.
Really, I don't think it is. The nose is definitely not a Sashi. But Naga, thanks for that. Okay, look. And while we wait for the next photo, Sam Naidu says, if racial discrimination is a learned behavior, let's talk about how we can unlearn it as opposed to complaining about it. And absolutely, and I think that's the intent of it. Leon says, this looks like a kiss. All right, maybe we can go to our next image, Andrea.
Yes, let's go.
Okay, so that's Elon Musk, and he's giving up on life. He's he's making a profound statement. It's a aha moment for Elon Musk. I don't know. Andrea, your sort of first impressions?
My first impression was like, is he going to another planet? I don't know. It's always unpredictable, right? So the first thing I always think of Elon Musk, I see, he's like, where is he going next?
and looks like Sashi says, come join me up here in this new planet. And Matthew says, weird, man. Looks like a weird guy out there. So throw out your comments. What you think Elon Musk is doing out there. For those of you know that's Elon Musk. Otherwise, just like a weird man, like, ooh.
Welcome to my cult. Yeah.
All right.
So we're gonna
throw up a couple more images. Yep. Rebel, right? From Leon. From Leon saying Rebel. All right. Next move. Next show. Ooh.
The fanny pack.
Yeah, man.
When I see this, I think of my dad.
Oh, you do? Okay, so images of your dad. Wait, I know somebody who was kind of ostracized because he was wearing a fanny pack and like calling him a sissy. So that sort of image comes in like, but somebody says no, it's Dwayne Johnson because he wears a fanny pack. And then there's DVD. I have no idea how this is a DVD, but maybe it's because of DVD salesman.
Yeah. So in Malaysia, right, in the Pasar Malam, there's Chinese uncles who sell. Yeah, they will sell the DVDs, and they usually wear this because it's fast for cash, to put in their cash and stuff. Yeah.
All
I
right.
think John Cena wears these too. Yeah.
John Cena, huh?
Yes.
All right, couple more picture. I might not want to comment on this. You should comment, Andrea.
I don't know. This is tough. I think I see this maybe rich uncles lah.
Okay, we got a hairy man. We've got a Along Pasar Malam coming in. We've got a couple dad fashion.
Wow.
I've got dad fashion coming in. Dad fashion. Okay, man. All right. Ooh. Andrea?
She's very beautiful. Like, man, when I first saw her, I was very stunned. I was like, wow, really, really beautiful. Like, I can't even speak when I saw this picture first time. Yeah.
And looks like a couple of people agree with you. Uncle with money. Okay, that's probably Okay, so I see Naga said like the shoy. I've got model. I've got curls. Sorry,
Curls, yeah.
curls with an S, with double S's. And let me see if there's others that's coming in.
Nagalingam says,
Wow, wow,
wow.
wow, wow. Okay, this is truly a wow, right? So we've got that. You know, while okay, so let's go to the next. Ooh, long fingernails. And earlier on, Shalini talks about the lady being gorgeous, the skin though. So that was the earlier one. So for this, run. I'm not sure why he's saying run. I think probably Sashi had some bad experience with girls with long fingernails. So run away, party girl. And Naga loves it. Beautiful. Um, so nice. Good. Some nice comments there. Okay, our last, is this the last one? I think.
Yeah, I think
This is the
let's
last
have the
one.
last one.
It's
The
the last
last
one.
image.
Okay, just now on the fingernail, someone said Pontianak, so I will not get there. I'm not even going to translate what that means for the non-Malaysians. Okay, so Matthew says
Aunties.
aunties. And let's see what else is out there. Any other quick comments from folks? Okay. So she
Stolen.
thinks it's stolen, and I think Naga sort of gets the same impression. Expensive, something that Rosma Manso will probably be using, huh? Oh, that's probably why Sashi said stolen, huh? Okay, so luxury, Louis Vuitton there, LV, and rich aunties. Okay, so thanks so much. We've got a comment from Zurain, I think, who good comment, say, we also have to be aware of our own biases too. And we all have it. We have to realize this and be honest with ourselves. And Andrea, one of the things we want to talk about is the horn effect, right? I think you want to the horn and halo effect, right? Because this is really about our own implicit biases. Sometimes unconsciously we have this bias. So talk us through, Zoe, and thanks for teeing up this dialogue, because I think it's important that we discuss this horn and halo effect. Talk us through that. Talk us through what that means, Andrea.
Yeah, so I mean, some of us, like when we are looking at the comments, right, there are some that are good and negative, good and positive, like beautiful, sparkling, gorgeous, and then there are some be like, this is really weird, or this is a bit creepy. There's another end of it, which is the negative ones. So this actually halo and horn effect can sort of explain to us sometimes what we look as attractive will then immediately associate all these positive things to it, right? So we're going to show a quick video on what actually the halo effect experiment long time ago when they started this. So let's pull that video up for everyone to watch.
Have you ever wondered why attractive people who look happy appear so frequently in commercials? Well, back in 1920, psychologist Edward Thorndike coined a term for it, the halo effect. He noticed that if people have certain traits that we rate highly, such as attractiveness, we tend to perceive them as also being competent, successful, and so on. In other words, the halo effect is a judgment error or a cognitive bias which revolves around us starting with accurate information, for example, noticing that someone is attractive, and based on that information, we wrongfully assume other positive things are also true, despite not having evidence to that effect. However, things can get tricky. For example, Marshall Dermer and Beryl L. Thiel noticed back in 1975 that being attractive can backfire on you because jealousy can make those less attractive than you rate you lower than you deserve. You can think of this as the reverse halo effect. Finally, we also have the so-called horn effect, and the name speaks for itself in that you notice or know something negative about someone and find it very difficult to appreciate or quantify the good things that person does. For example, knowing that someone used to be a criminal and finding it difficult to believe he or she changed, even if that is the case.
All right, and that's very interesting, right? Because when we looked at the definition just now, right, stereotype is often overgeneralized. So halo effect and horn effect, the same thing, is also a cognitive bias. And because we already associated one person with a specific way we see them, after that, everything they do, you sort of categorize and confirm and say, okay, they're attractive, therefore, they're successful, they're good, kind-hearted people and stuff like that. And we're going to go deep into this unconscious bias that we talk about, this cognitive bias that's happening, and specifically in the workplaces. Yeah.
And you know, I mean, I know I'd love to hear our audience also. No, I mean, in you know, have you seen examples of both the halo effect, the positive, or the reverse halo, negative, or even the horn effect, where when we perceive something as bad, it automatically becomes bad, and you know, it sort of is ingrained with us. I mean, I think you know, many times personally, you know, especially when you look at the politics of Malaysia, many times, you know, you're like, these politicians are all bad, you know, kind of rubbing it as a overall, you know, kind of, you know, the moment someone says, I'm politics, that must be, you know, one of the corrupt guys. I mean, it's automatically you ascribe a certain sort of attribute towards a group of people, regardless. You know, some may actually, you know, talk about the Hannah Yos and the Lim Guan Engs and others who may essentially want to do good for the country, but you sort of automatically associate certain things with them. So if any of you have any examples of what you think are the halo or you know, the horn effect in your lives, or where you see it happening, share that in the comments. Love to you know, get some examples of it out there. Sorry, Andrea, you were talking about the application in the workplace, right?
Yes, correct. But maybe as we wait for some of the comments to come in, maybe we can also share ourselves, right? As hosts, as people, what kind of stereotypes or prejudices we've had before. I think I can start off first. I'll kick the ball running, right? I think one of the first prejudice I had as a kid is towards Indian people. And the funny thing was, my best friend as a kid, when I was really, really young, as a little kid, I played a lot with a lot of Indian friends because my community was mainly Indian. But then when I see an uncle who is an Indian man, I get very scared. And it's very interesting. I always wondered, where did I learn this from? Because my parents didn't teach me all of this. So I always wondered, did I learn this from school or from the movies I watch, or just observing how people react to Indian people in Malaysia specifically? And much later only I realized, oh no, this is bad, right? And that's when we started to change. So it became very conscious. What about you, Roshan? Have you had
You know,
stereotypes before?
and I'm going to make it more applicable to the workplace. I think one of the biggest biases we found in Leaderonomics a couple of years ago was this affinity bias, right? And this is really, you know, if you think about affinity bias, it's about, you know, what's that culture that we have, and how do we find that culture fit, right? And it was interesting because we did this Gallup Strength Finder. One of our leaders, Joseph Tan, at that time was you know, setting up this Leaderonomics Good Monday, and we did strengths for everyone. And then we found, you know, when we look at the categorization, we say, hey, how come everyone we hired, except for a few outliers, myself, I was an outlier, and there's one or two, everybody else is very relational and very much you know, kind of in the thinking space, right? Not so much action oriented or execution based, or trying to get things done, or trying to woo people and sell, right? So we found that we were very much thinkers, not so much doers, and a lot of very relational, but very internal relational people. And we said, look, 70-80%. And then, you know, it's very interesting when we found, like, hey, you know, the HR person essentially, you know, kind of dictates who we hire. And when you already have resumes coming in, you tend to, you know, decide that certain resumes are of the type that will be successful in Leaderonomics. And that's because 80-90% of that type. And so we ended up hiring more and more people of a certain type. Until at some point in time, I remember this. I said, don't care. Every single person that comes in, I must interview. And I'm completely different, right? I'm the outlier here. So enabling outliers to say, let's get some loudmouth people, you know, not everybody who are conformists. Let's get people who rebel. Let's get people who are you know, curious in a different way, noisy way, you know, and ultimately it altered the DNA of the organization. But that's what diversity is, right? It's not just diversity of people, meaning that it's not just diversity of race. It's also diversity of experiences, personalities, and types. And sometimes we get so cornered, we need to hire, you know, different races, but they're all the same type. So that's not necessarily a good thing, right? So to me, I think that was one example where we learned, right? And this technology, right? Data actually helps you, right? So when we have that technology, and you do things like the ABA traits, and when you do, you know, use good sort of assessment tools, right? You're able to dissect and say, hey, the tech tells you that, hey, you have a problem. You're all the same, right? You think you're diverse because you're different races, but your type is all the same, right? There's a comment from Rajiv, which I just want to quickly play this and I'll get back to you, Andrea. You know, workplace recruitment, especially when a candidate comes highly recommended for someone you trust, And Rajiv, I'm assuming you're meaning that it sort of builds biasness in the workspace. Sorry, Andrea, you were saying something?
Yeah, and this something I was very curious about, right? Because when I read about hiring practices in HR and stuff like that, they are so focused on there's always a spectrum, right? There's a group of people who focuses on hiring for culture fit, right? And then that's the problem that comes arise, right? Everybody is quite similar because that's the culture. And then there's a group of people who wants that diversity in the way they hire. Now, how is HR going to decide? Do we follow our culture or do we look for diversity? What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you must realize that unconscious bias happens all the time. I mean, and we cannot control it, right? So when you think about HR, they're going to be unconsciously biased. That's a fact. I mean, it's a given, right? And the science tells us that that our minds make decisions intuitively before we are aware of it. And research proves that none of us, all of us, are not immune to implicit bias. Like we like to think our logical arguments drive our decision making, but actually there's unconscious activity going on inside our brain that actually affects our judgments and decision. And this includes hiring decisions. So when you talk about the hiring process, right, we justify it by saying culture, and we justify it after we've unconsciously made a decision on opinion based on impression, right? So it starts like someone mentioned, it actually starts at the resume phase, right? The resume, you already kind of threw away the resumes that may not necessarily be that. And how do you decide? You look at the face, you look at the and I always tell people I never put my photo in any of the resumes because what for, and I know when I first came back to Malaysia, a lot of people thought I was don't know who I was, right? They had this impression that I was this race and this religion and this. I'm like, just let it be, right? And for a while, I was actually playing zakat, as a Muslim for about a year plus when I first came back to Malaysia. So, to me, I think it's because it's unconscious. We can actually build structures and processes to eliminate it. And one of the things we did is that I said, look, let different people from different sort of personalities and biasness, because we are somewhat biased. Let's make sure we have a process in place to ensure we remove some of this unconscious bias from the hiring process. All right. So every candidate that is recommended or that comes in, needs to get some form of quick sort of interviews, maybe from one or two different people, and not necessarily from the same person. And ultimately, you make sure that at least 3 to 4 people are meeting these people, right? So that's one way of sort of looking at it, right? From that angle. I comment from Sashi that says, I'm curious, the whole unconscious bias aspect, is there a way we can start to control it? Because we usually only have a split second. We can't take back our initial expression, comment, and remark, even if we didn't mean to say it. And Sashi, I think you're spot on, right? Now, I think what we need to do is we need to be very self-aware, right? At what is our unconscious bias? And I realize this, I may be unconsciously biased I remember this because one of my employees, or at least my co-founders, said, hey, when it comes to MBS boys, MBS is my old school, Methodist boys school. I'm like, oh, MBS boys, all very good one, and that is because, every MBS guy we hire, I probably spend a lot more time developing them, ensuring they're successful, right? So ultimately, the history says that MBS guys are really good, and somehow every time I talk to we tend to highlight the former students who are very successful, right? We don't talk about the 80 or 70, 80% who are not so successful, right? I mean, it's always going to be the top 10% in any school. So you got this thing, so that you're unconscious. But so when I say, okay, this MBS boy, I'm not going to interview somebody else. Interview if that person passes all your tests, the final interview, okay, then I already took out the biasness from there. But if they don't pass the test, it never comes to me, right? So you sort of implicitly build certain processes in place, actually, to enable yourself. Because sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead,
and to add to it, and to add to that, I believe that yes, sometimes it happens in a split second. But I mean, in psychology, right, we've learned a lot that if you are having an unconscious thought, if you put it into a conscious thought, it will move into a subconscious thought, and then it becomes your new habit, your new norm. The way you think becomes that way. So if ever that happens, right, like we mentioned just now, right, there's levels to discrimination. People don't jump straight into discrimination automatically. They must start with a belief first, right? And then belief comes from the people you speak with, the group you associate yourself with, and then the things that you absorb. and then whether you're self-aware, whether you turn that belief into a prejudice or discrimination. So we got to catch it at the belief stage. And if you already know that you're going to move towards the other sides, then you got to stop it. I do think that it can be prevented. Yeah.
Absolutely, and another comment by Jennifer Kennedy. Jennifer, thanks. It's a great comment. There's a lot of halo and horn effects during the interview session. Untrained human resource managers, have this unconscious bias, may have a strong tendency to do premature hiring before they have gained evidence in the interview itself, and that's very, very true, right? I mean, the halo effects. I talked about the MBS, right? Because we kind of we have an impression. Oh, I'm from MBS, this person's from MBS, oh, must be really good, right? Because I was good, right? So sometimes we have this sort of things. And sometimes, like, oh, you mean your father was this person? Wow, you automatically, kind of put a halo on that person because it's like, oh, must be this, there's a rub-off effect. But, the father and the son may be completely different people, right? And so we sometimes have that. But I, like to the point, Jennifer, I mean, one very good point. And, what we have to do is to train ourselves, right? And you say the untrained. And I think you use a very good word, the untrained, right? Because when you train yourself, and we did this very consciously, where I said, look, when you have the final 3 candidates for a position that you decided, I want all 3 of them to be very different. If they're all the same, then we are in this losing battle. We are just deciding, who's better in terms of skill. So they must bring different things to the table, and then we have that dialogue. Like this person brings this kind of tenacity, somebody else brings a kind of very deep functional knowledge and depth. Somebody else brings something else, and then we can talk about what do we need at this point in time for the organization. But when like you said, it's very important at the early stages to be able to enable HR to do their role in a better way. But go ahead.
And when I was also looking for some of the stats that's happening, I realized that we use the word stereotyping quite generally, right? But there's so many types of stereotypes that can happen, not just race. It can be things like generational stereotyping, right? For example, people have this understanding that millennials are very entitled, they're job hoppers, they'll jump everywhere, they just want the money. There's a lot of stereotypes going on. And even when I was reading, right, a lot of research actually ran with that. A lot of HR have started to generational stereotype, and they will say that this person won't last long. We only give them a certain position in the company because they don't want them to rise up on top. And it's breaking down the HR system of these companies as well. And there's, of course, gender stereotyping. That's very common, right? Glass ceilings for women, or even specifically gay men. If they know you're gay, you have a certain prejudice towards you, you have lower pay. There's a lot of things that you see these all the time on the news, right? And of course, as usual, the race stereotyping. And one very interesting research, right, in the US that they found, they did a study with different organizations and companies. And even when employers or colleagues have good experiences with minority colleagues, they chose not to hire these people, which really baffles me, right? I was so confused. I was like, but you had good experiences. Wouldn't that change the way you perceive a group of people? I mean, what are your thoughts, Roshan, on these stats?
Yeah, so I think I cannot disagree, because I think in every different company there's different issues and there is I totally agree. I think there is prejudice, there is racism, there is stereotyping. All these things happen. I think the question one of those in the audience asked is, look, you can talk a lot about it, but I think we need to do something about it. Right. So in the US research, right, when they have a good experience with minority, but they opt not to, right? So sometimes the way around it, some countries, of course, do, we've done this in Malaysia, which is the 30% rule, right? Where we say 30% of all boards must have women. It's like a law that's institutionalized before 2025, I think. And we see that in certain countries where they've institutionalized laws. But more importantly, I think it's the education, right? And the processes. So I think if you are a leader in a company and there's, for example, let's take a couple of bias. Let's say affinity bias, where people are hiring for cultural fit. How do you avoid it? Is you create processes that make sure this doesn't happen. Let's say it's confirmation bias, where when you have this interview, they sort of look at the resume and they kind of create that sort of halo effect depending on your school that you came from. Oh, Harvard Business School must be really good. But I've interviewed people who are from that school. I'm like, man, this guy is like useless, right? So how do you eliminate it? Is you have proper, sometimes when you see that, wow, from a big school, the interview itself is like, you are not interviewing the person, no. You're actually trying to convince that person to join you, right? So you say, okay, I need to put processes in place that we've really sort of put the right processes to interview this person. Attribution bias, right? This happens all the time, and sometimes this may seem harmless, right? But how do you avoid it rather than assume, right? That a candidate is unfit for a job or an interview, right? Take the time just to take that extra phone call and just check in. And I think we did that, Andrea, and you did that, right? With the interviews for interns, right? Even though you said, I want to hire only 20, 30 interns, you actually ended up calling up hundreds and hundreds of them and just checking in and seeing maybe there's a gem there that the resume doesn't sort of see. You talk about conformity bias, you talk about the halo effect, you talk about the horn effect, all these things, the contrast effect. I mean, there's many or gender bias. There's many processes that we can put in place that can enable us to ensure that these things are eradicated somewhat. I mean, you cannot 100% eradicate, but you can somewhat minimize or mitigate it as much as you can. I'm going to take a quick comment from Riddhi, a leader from India. So says, many senior leaders operate from what I have seen live. I know how it works, and hence they take a decision based on their worldview. They sort of right, they stereotype, right? So they or they call it leveraging experience. So it's a fine line. How do you differentiate? I think just very quickly to respond to Riddhi, I think we need to get to know ourselves, right? Because it is a fine line between what our experience tells us or what our gut tells us about a character. And sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. And I think more often than not now, we become really good at thin slicing. And this is something that Malcolm Gladwell, wrote a book about. Thin slicing is your gut, right? When you see something, you have that gut, and you can be very wrong in your thin slicing. But as you start to realize that you're wrong, and you take action to fix it, over time your thin slicing becomes better. And so, my only response to that is, yes, it's a fine line. But I think if you are wrong, right, you hire somebody, doesn't work out 3 months later in the organization, then you still have to ask that question, why? And why was my decision wrong? And what biases was I, implicitly kind of bestowing these candidates? And if you can catch yourself, then over time you become really better at being able to use thin slicing or use this ability to use your gut or leverage experience, as you want to call it, Riddhi. Andrea?
Yeah. And I think there are two things I like to comment. The first one is I agree, right, that this is a fine line, but it's also a practice in your mind that needs to happen. So there's another mental model that it looks like thin slicing as well. The information that you gather must be able to change the way you have thought before. So that's something that I really agree. And I love first impressions. I believe in first impressions, but more than I believe in first impressions, I believe that first impressions can change. So that's how I stop myself from saying that if a person I have gotten an impression that a person A, they're going to be person A forever. I never believe in that. So that's one way to be really conscious that openness that you have to have, that there's a possibility of change. And then there's another one that you mentioned about systems in place. And this is why systemic racism comes about, right? Because long time ago, they created systems that thought was useful for
Absolutely.
people. If you look at
Absolutely.
Malaysia, right? We have institutionalized a system that is trying to help different races to economically grow together. But the problem with that is people don't revisit systems a lot. And that's the problem.
Absolutely.
Then it gets stuck.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this is what Naga was talking, right? About Malaysia, right? When Naga said, look, it's institutionalized, right? It's systemic, right? And we condone it because after a while we assume that it's part and parcel of what Malaysian life is, right? It's been institutionalized, and we need to change the narrative, but we also need to change the systems and structures, because structurally it's built to ensure that racism continues. And it continues across the board, right? The Chinese are racist, the Malays may be racist, the Indians are racist. Everybody becomes very race-based because the country is governed according to that, and the systems in place are such, right? Sorry to steal your thunder, but just reminding us of what Naga shared just now.
Yeah, and it's really, really apt, right? It's really excellent because we see this all the time. Now the question is how? How do we fight back, right? And there's a lot of questions that come from HR. For example, one of the things that I always hear from HR is that the experience that they got has become a stereotype, but because they want to not waste time on the higher risk candidates, that means most likely to fit my stereotype, I'm not going to even bother looking at the resume. And that's something more personal as a person who's hiring or a person who is making these decisions. Remember that you're part of the system that you are creating, right? You might be in a different organization or a completely different industry, but you're part of the system that we are building. So if you are part of this, and even as individuals, I urge you, right, to be conscious of these bias and fight that system. Yeah, and we have another video we want to share, right? What happened with the kids from the blue eye, brown eye experiment. And hopefully that inspires you to see that if it can be learned, it can also be unlearned. All right, let's have a look at that video.
I use Orton Gillingham Phonics. We use the card pack. The brown-eyed children were in the low class the first day, and it took them 5.5 minutes to get through the card pack. The second day, it took them 2.5 minutes. The only thing that had changed was the fact that now they were superior people. You went faster than I've ever had anyone go through the card pack. Why couldn't you get them yesterday?
We had those collars on.
You think the collars kept you?
Just keep thinking about those collars.
Oh, and you couldn't think as well with the collars on. 4 minutes and 18 seconds. How long did it take you yesterday?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. How long did it take you today?
4 minutes and 18 seconds.
What happened?
One down.
What were you thinking of?
This.
What did you people who are wearing blue collars now find out today?
I know what they felt like yesterday. I did too.
How did they feel yesterday?
Down. Like a dog on a leash. Yeah. Like you're chaining them up into prison. And you're throwing the key away.
Should the color of some other person's eyes have anything to do with how you treat them?
No.
All right, then should the color of their skin?
No.
Should you judge people
No.
by the color of their skin?
No.
Yeah, and that's a very, very strong video, right? We don't need to say much about it. And that's what happens, even with kids. So if kids can do that, we can also unlearn that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of unlearning to learn, to undo, right? I mean, we've got a lot of unlearning to do and undo. And we've got a lot of systems, I think, to change. And I just want to make a final plea. Technology actually is a great enabler, right? I mean, with technology, right? One of the things I found very powerful recently, is that apps like Happily, right, where when I use them, I can not need, do I recognize people, but everybody can recognize each other, and recognition is very important, right? Because like just like the kids, right? Once you recognize someone for the self-confidence permeates from them, and when it permeates, it makes them sharper, it makes them smarter, it makes them do things more efficiently, and I think there is a way for us to use technology, whether it's for recognition, whether it's for enabling, whether it's for hiring, whether it's for enabling us to sift through things, I highly recommend us leveraging technology for that. Andrea, your final thoughts before we close out?
I think it's important on both levels, systems and individuals, right? It starts with you, and you are also part of the problem if you don't do anything about it. I think that's the harsh reality and truth that I hold to. And I agree with technology, right? If you look at the technology around us, they are providing us platforms to talk, to converse, to talk about all the things that are happening, and then people become conscious. I also got this bias. Oh my goodness, all this time I thought they were these kind of people, but when I spoke to them, they're completely different. So yeah, let's end with this amazing tech that we use ourselves, and we know how it works.
And just before that, there's a couple of things I want to call out. There's some great articles on Leaderonomics.com. So if you go to Leaderonomics.com, how my grandmother conquered stereotyping and stereotypes by Ong Cheng Yi, who's in Norway. So you can check out this article by Cheng Yi. There's also media's role in portraying women and building negative stereotypes by Ka Yi. And of course, we have Breaking Stereotypes by Leaderonomics in Leaderonomics.com. You just Google that. You should be able to check that out. I think one of the most interesting, like you said, Andrea, technology is great. And think about technology, right? I mean, my kids, they go on Discord and other places, and they're meeting people from all the world with nothing but I'm called,
A name.
a crazy-eyed girl or whatever it is. I mean, obviously there's some stereotyping there, but generally they don't know, is this American, is this black skin, is this what, there's no sort of stereotypes. And technology, I think, is the great equalizer. So, just as we close out, here's a great tech. If you have not invested in good technology to enable you to drive out racism, stereotyping, and ensure there's recognition, empowerment, and sort of a fresh engagement of your employees, one of the best tech is Happily. So let's end with a quick video on Happily. Wish you all the best. Have a great week ahead, and we'll see you next Wednesday for more, for another engaging and enthralling topic in the world of psychology. Keep psyched, and here's Happily as we wrap up this show.